Welcome to Unscripted, a podcast with no script by design. We're not following a plan, and that's exactly the point. This show is about whatever's on the minds of your hosts, Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. We'll dig into what's happening in the world, and just as importantly, what isn't making headlines this week. So with that, let's get started. The conversation could go anywhere because we go wherever the microphones take us. Here's Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. Well, prepare yourself for something brand new. This is a brand new podcast. It's called Unscripted for a reason. We do not have a script. We hope to make this weekly or regular, if not weekly, podcast. My name's Larry Lannan, and welcoming back my old partner from another podcast we did for 5 years. But now that Duncan Giles is retired, we've decided to move away from that and just do our own podcast. So welcome back to podcasting, Duncan.
Thanks, Larry. As always, it's good to be here.
So we are going to do as I said, this podcast, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to talk about some serious issues as well. We're going to talk about a few news stories that probably did not make the news, which we think are worth talking about. We'll have a major story. We'll talk about protests and the history of protesting in the United States, how it's part of our history, and how there's always an important balance when dealing with protests in a place like the United States with our Constitution and our First Amendment. I'm going to have a little Critic's Corner on some things that I've read and watched, and we'll end it up with a top 5 list. So with all that in mind, let's start off, and I will start off with, I'm going to have 2 different stories that may not have made the news. Here's my first story that did not make the news very many places. I've been a baseball fan for a long time, so I still remember a man by the name of Doc Ellis. He was a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates most of his career, and he's best known for pitching a no-hitter. Now, no-hitters are pretty special, but they do happen many times throughout the history of baseball. When you get into a season, you're lucky to have 1 or 2 of them. But this no-hitter was special, because Doc Ellis pitched it against the San Diego Padres in 1970. Now, why are we still talking about this no-hitter 35 years later? Well, because Doc Ellis, after he left baseball, smart move there, admitted that when he pitched that no-hitter, he was coming off what we called an LSD trip. For those of you who didn't go through the 1960s as I did, LSD was one of these recreational drugs. You went on a trip or a hallucination thing. It could be a good trip or a bad trip. He didn't tell us whether this one was a good or bad, but he went on an LSD trip the night before he pitched the no-hitter. So he said he was suffering from the after effects of LSD when he pitched that no-hitter. So it's a good thing he didn't mention this while he was playing baseball, because if that were the case, I think LSD would have been a very popular drug with major league pitchers. But obviously, LSD kind of moved off the recreational drug list, and it did have its problems. So it wasn't ever a good idea to take it, but he was quite open about it. So it's the no-hitter on LSD. That's how that was remembered 35 years ago on June the 12th of 1970. By the way, Duncan, I hope it's not a bad omen that we are beginning this podcast on Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th never been an issue for me, Larry, but Saturday the 14th, I've had fractured wrist and pretty banged up ankle. So on 2 separate Saturday the 14th. So hopefully, I'm going to wrap myself in bubble wrap tomorrow, but Friday the 13th, no problem. As for Doc was a trip. For those of you that don't know, and you and I know a lot of baseball history, he was an interesting guy. And 55 years ago, he pitched that no-hitter. Doc says he was on an LSD trip the night before. There was a lot of speculation that Doc was still riding the wave during the game, but he didn't want to say so. And I would think it would be really tough to find home plate while you're on LSD, but that's just me. Never experienced any illegal substances like that. I wouldn't know, but I would think that it would be a little bit tough.
Well, that was before the days of drug testing, obviously.
Yeah.
By the way, you're better at math than I am. It was 55, not 35 years ago. I mean, yeah, that was a long time ago now that we look at that. Do you have a story that you want to talk about?
Yeah. One of the things that I found interesting is France. The story got very little play. Came out last week or earlier this week with an issue. They have banned whale and dolphin shows in France, which I totally get, totally understand with those type of mammals, but they didn't have a plan for afterwards. What are they going to do? So in one of these parks, there are a couple of orcas and some dolphins in tanks that are being there, and nothing is happening with them. They're being fed. They're still, the company that owns them or did the shows is still feeding them, but there were some, ways they were born in captivity, so they were very hesitant to release them because they don't think that they would be able to hunt, figure out how to travel in packs and do things on their own. There was a couple of offers to help, including one from the people who Free Willy was based on, that they did retrain an orca to go back out in the wild, and they offered to do that for free. Hey, we'll take care of this. We will help them out. We'll take care of them. Well, they're not in the European Union. These people are not based in Europe. So basically the folks that are in France at the head of this and the European Union is saying, well, we like the idea, but we don't want it to go outside of, Europe, because it shouldn't go, these shouldn't go outside of Europe. If you're helping these orcas and you're helping these dolphins, who in the heck cares where it's going to? And, it's this type of nationalism or, holding on to this type of thing that just drives me wild, because it serves absolutely no purpose except to obstruct what needs to be done for these. And so it's just, to me, it's just something that makes absolutely no sense. And you see parallels of this type of thing of nationalism, or, in the case of Europe, that they're Europe-centric, drives me absolutely nuts when you can do something for the greater good.
Wait, you're telling me the Europeans may be doing something wrong?
Something that, they basically don't like what the rest of the world might be doing. I know that's a stretch, and it can get quite interesting. But that happens in Europe. It happens basically everywhere, where people are we're very into our own culture, and we don't think anybody else has the right ideas or is doing the right thing, which to me is just mystifying.
Well, let me get to my current story that may not have made the news elsewhere. The Disney company and Universal, they do more than put theme parks together. They have all sorts of entertainment that they produce, as most of you know, TV, films, and on and on. Well, AI has been a big thing, as you know, and there's a company called Mid-Journey, and I guess Universal and Disney have decided to pick on this particular company. This is happening all over the place. They're doing something called image generation. So you could use the AI and you generate images, videos, whatever. The problem is they're picking things that are on the Disney and Universal world. They have rights to these things. So they are now suing this company. There's something else that happened 2 years ago, which is still in the courts. The New York Times has sued an AI company owned by Microsoft, and they're saying that, hey, you're using our New York Times material to create your AI generation, whatever it might be, and you're violating our rights. And they're saying, oh, it's just fair use. Well, the New York, and I won't get into what fair use is. That's basically when you take a small portion of something, give somebody credit, and that's fair use. Well, the Times is saying, no, no, no. And so far, there have been lots of challenges Microsoft has tried to put up to this lawsuit. And so far, the judges have sided with the Times. So this is moving forward. So this whole issue of AI and how that impacts rights that people have, people like Disney, Universal, the New York Times, they have rights, and they've spent a tremendous amount of money to create this material. And what can AI companies do and not do? I think that the courts are going to have to figure this out, Duncan.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a complex question going forward because AI is going to continue to be a part of our lives, and I think it's going to increase in our lives. And these types of issues are going to be huge because, like you said, they've got this intellectual property or actual property that they've paid money for. They license it out, things of that nature. And when AI picks it out, and this is one of those things right now, AI is still in its infancy, still needs to have somebody check it over. If you take a look and say, okay, reformulate this news story AI, a lot of times they'll put in things that aren't there. So, taking something that they shouldn't be taking is going to be a huge issue. And I totally get why, the Times and Disney Universal also want to protect their interests because it's only going to get worse if we don't start trying to figure out how to regulate this. And it's not going to be easy.
Before we go on to our main story, Duncan, I think one of the great anticipations that I will have before we do these podcasts is where will Duncan Giles be? Now, today we're looking at him, and I was trying to figure out, which Star Wars planet are you on today?
This was just one of those Zoom backgrounds that came out, and did I want to have something of the background of my home, or did I want to have something a little bit interesting? So that's just what I picked out. Haven't done it with Zoom before, so just something a little bit interesting to try and take attention away from my face, which, of course, as we know, my best features are down in a mine at midnight during a thunderstorm. So just something a little bit interesting.
Yes, if you're watching on video, our open on video has kind of a cartoon generated picture of you and I. And when my wife saw it, she says, "That doesn't look like you. You look a lot younger than you should be." And I said, "Well, what's the problem with that? Plus, I have a lot more hair in that illustration of me than I really have. So I guess I shouldn't complain about that either." So the big question each week we do this podcast, where in the world will Duncan Giles be? Let's talk about our main issue. And, I think it's been in the news a lot, and I want to talk about this because this whole issue of protests. We've seen protests in American history throughout. It's part of our First Amendment right under the United States Constitution. It's part of the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s. There have been marches, women's marches for various rights. In recent years, Black Lives Matter has had many protests, and we're seeing protests today about other issues. Peaceful protest is certainly legal, and it's certainly a part of our democracy. It's been a tool used for underrepresented people within America. And the main thing is it is our right to do that as long as it is nonviolent and law abiding. So you've been watching some of the protests that are going on today. What are some of the reactions you have to that?
Yeah, and you see the reporting on Los Angeles is it's all chaos and it's horrible and it's awful and all that, and then you hear things from people in Los Angeles saying, no, that's about 2 to 3% of this. The vast majority of these people are doing peaceful protests that we've had since before the United States was a country. And you can go back to this wasn't exactly lawful back then, but the Boston Tea Party. What was the Boston Tea Party? It was a protest against higher taxes. So we've had these types of protests all throughout our history. In the late 1700s, once we became a country, you had protests. You had protests in the 1800s, 1900s. You had people when they took away pensions from World War I veterans. All through that, we've had these type of protests. And that's part of what makes the United States of America great, is that we're able to have these types of discussions, disagreements, protests to bring attention to issues.
And I think the thing that we need to keep in mind, there are two things that we need to keep in mind here. Number one, the role of the police and the role of, let's say, the National Guard. It's, as we speak today, that's in the courts as to who has jurisdiction and command authority over the National Guard. Is it the governor of the state? Is it the president of the United States? Does he have the right to federalize the state national guard? I'm not going to get into that today because it's still in the courts. But police are always involved with protests, even if they are peaceful. And really, one thing people forget is that the role of a police department in a peaceful protest is to protect the rights of the protesters. They have a right to peacefully protest. And they also have another responsibility to keep public order going and to ensure everybody's safety, the protesters, the counter protesters, if there are people who protest the protest, and just anybody who's a bystander. I saw a news story about a recent protest in Los Angeles where this woman just wanted to walk to the grocery store and the police wouldn't let her go to the grocery store. I mean, she had a path to go. She wasn't going to be involved in any kind of a problem, and she was stopped by the police for what would appear to be no good reason, just because there was a protest going on. There was no violence at that time. So, I think the police have that very important responsibility to protect everybody, including just, the innocent bystanders who just happen to be there when the protest foams up.
And you take a look at, our state of Indiana, where game 3 of the NBA Finals, Indiana Pacers won. Thank you very much. They had a protest outside of Gamebridge where the game was being played of several hundred people. It was an orderly protest. The police were on top of everything. Nobody was harmed. Everybody was able to make their point, to talk about this, make sure that the issue is to the forefront. Doing it in front of a national, they knew they had a national audience there, so they wanted to do that for publicity, I'm sure, understandably so. But it was a peaceful protest, and that's exactly how it should go. And the police did their job perfectly. And kudos to the folks organizing the protest to make sure they kept them on point, and to the police departments that were involved that made sure everything was in order, that the protests were able to go on, bystanders were fine, people were still able to flow in and out of the game. So, I mean, this is how protests work here in the United States.
And it's important to remember, this is true, it happened in Indianapolis and other places, is it's customary for the people who organize the protest to meet with the police, to meet with the city officials, to make sure that everything is in order, because the people who organize these peaceful protests don't want violence. It can happen. You don't want it to happen, but it's not always in everybody's control. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that police have to be very careful about the use of force. Sometimes they use rubber bullets as crowd control if they're having a problem controlling the crowd. There was one incident, and this has to do with the media. The media sometimes can be a target. I was a reporter for years, never had to, that was an era where we didn't have a lot of organized protests, but had I been, covering it, I would have been right in the middle of it. There was a video that came out of a TV news reporter from Australia. I don't think she was on live, but they were recording a piece. She was standing where she was supposed to be, where the police and had told her she could stand. And she was hit by a rubber bullet while she was trying to talk on. And it was a horrible thing to watch. You don't want to. And she was targeted. I mean, there's no way that would have happened accidentally. I'm sorry. So the use of force you have to be careful about it, and you have to protect people who are there for a reason, and there would be no threat to anybody, journalists being one of them.
Yeah, and there are going to be bad actors in any situation out there. I mean, it's just human nature. So are you going to have people that take protests and try and turn them into something else? Or are you going to have members of, a police department that may overreact to something? But those are few and far between. The percentages of those are very, very small. The vast majority of protesters, the vast majority of the folks, the police and people in that type of area are very responsible, know what they're supposed to be doing, wanting to do the right thing, and wanting to uphold the rule of law. And that's the thing with protesters. They want to uphold the rule of law as well. And that's why they think that they are, that people do protest. And, you go back to, your use of force, You take a look at, how far have we come from, say, the 68 National Convention and Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where there were a lot of protests there and it just turned into anarchy. Whereas today it's relatively tame because people understand if they're trying to make their point, they want to do it the right way. And the police understand that and are acting responsibly as well.
And one of the chants that the Chicago protesters made one, just again and again during that whole Chicago protest that went badly, the whole world is watching. And that's true today. I mean, people looked at America as a place where we have a Constitution, we have a First Amendment. And if it looks like we're overplaying our hand, or the police are overplaying their hand, or being unnecessarily brutal, the whole world is watching that. That's true today. That was true in 1968. One thing I've noticed, and if you're a fan, and being a retired guy, I do this occasionally, you can go on YouTube and you can watch all these body cams that police officers have recorded. One thing you will normally see, there are always some bad actors, but police and sometimes protesters who are trained this way too, but the police are definitely trained in their regular training today on de-escalation tactics.
Yep.
If a police officer comes up against a belligerent person, they're going to do everything they can to calm that person down, to lower the temperature. And if it can't be done, then you have to take charge. But the police do want to de-escalate. I think that's true with protests as well, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think, I share your enjoyment of those body cams. And I think body cams on police officials are a wonderful thing because it has shown, like you said, the vast majority of time, 99% of the time, the police are trying to de-escalate a situation, handle it as tactfully as they can, as peacefully as they can. And it, a lot of times what's shown on the internet is, the outliers always get shown on the internet. So it's always the people who are causing a scene or something of that nature. But, like I said, with the police doing the right thing, the vast majority of protesters doing the right thing, this is what America's all about, making sure that everybody is safe, both the people, property, things of that nature. And, that's what we're seeing aside from a small percentage of bad actors. And for those of you who sit there saying, well, it's anarchy in the streets of California and things of that nature, you need to talk to some people from California because they will tell you it is not. There are certain areas that at times can be bad if bad actors take it over. But the vast, vast, vast majority are doing things the right way, and the police are acting responsibly as well.
Well, and I think it's interesting because this started with some of the Black Lives Matter protests. That was really the first time we had a lot of police body camera footage that we could use. And what I found interesting is that when you are in media or some YouTube channel or whoever you are, and you're trying to get body cam video from a police department, it takes time because they have to block out certain things. You'll notice that if you see a body cam and a police officer goes into his or her patrol car, they're going to block out the computer screen because you're not supposed to see that. And you'll hear certain words not said. Maybe you're using somebody's name that had nothing to do with it or somebody's address or phone number. No reason that has to be on the public record. So you don't get body cams, like you get news footage right away, but editors are looking at that first. What happens with body cams and police, it takes a while to get that. And usually there's a charge. I know where I live in Fishers, Indiana, that it's a charge per minute because of all the work that has to go into editing it and checking it out and blocking out certain things legally that need to be done. When you look at the National Guard, I'm not going to get into the whole legal issue, which is in the courts right now about who can command the National Guard, local or federal authorities. But normally they're brought in if the civil authorities need some help. But anytime you talk about the National Guard, Duncan, the first thing that comes to mind of anybody of my age and yours also is Kent State, because that was a great situation. Not great, but it was a situation that illustrates what happens when you have a peaceful protest. You may have people throwing rocks or something like that, but there was nothing serious going on as far as we know from all the investigations that were done about Kent State back in the early 70s. And that's the Kent State situations where people died, students died, and did that really have to happen? So when the National Guard comes in, it's usually because it's a last resort. It's because the local police department and other authorities just don't have the personnel to do it. So I think government, should do that when necessary, but be very particular and careful how you do this.
Yep, and make sure that the state, federal, local, county all have to work in conjunction with each other. And if you're working at cross purposes, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the folks who have to go out there as National Guardsmen. It's not good for the policemen who don't know, what the National Guard's going to do. They don't know their training because they know their fellow officers, how they've been trained, but they don't know what's going to happen with National Guard. And it's a wild card for people who are protesters who may look to say, okay, we're going to try and do some provocation because we know the police won't respond, but National Guard might. And it's just, you don't want to throw, you don't want to light a match that sets something off. And that's what I think a big fear is when you do that type of thing, when it's not requested.
So to kind of wrap this up, I think what we're saying, Duncan, is that we have to protect everybody's constitutional rights to peacefully protest. We have to make efforts to prevent violence and to deal with it if it happens, and do everything you can to de-escalate any tensions that may happen. That's kind of the way I look at it. I think we sometimes lose sight of this when we see selected pieces of video or this whole, how should I put it, appearance that a city is in flames when really just there's a protest going on in a few blocks of the downtown.
Exactly so. And, that's, one of the things that they say, I may hate with every fiber of my being what you are saying, but I will protect that right that you have to do so with every fiber of my being as well. And that's part of what America is. Even if we disagree with what somebody is shouting from a rooftop, they're allowed to do these types of protests, and they're allowed to, as long as it's not endangering public safety. And that's where the difference of opinion comes in. And, to me, the local authorities who are there on the ground are the best ones to judge that. But that's just me from an outside perspective.
So that's our discussion. Just peaceful protests, and if protests get out of hand, there should be a special way to de-escalate and deal with it if it happens. But let's keep everything in a proper perspective, protect everybody's rights, and keep people safe. I think that's what Duncan and I are trying to say. Sometimes we lose sight of what the Constitution says and what police should and should not be doing, and certainly the National Guard, whoever else is involved in keeping the peace in a situation like that. Just try to keep all these things in mind. One thing we're going to do occasionally on this podcast to do something called Critic's Corner. I'm going to do it this week on a couple of things. It's something we've read or seen. I have just watched it. There's only two of the three episodes that are up. By the way, Duncan, it's interesting how branding works. It all started off as something called Home Box Office. Remember, Home Box Office started in the 70s. Then it was kind of shortened to just HBO. They didn't use Home Box Office anymore. Then streaming came in, and now, hey, we're going to call it Max. So kind of moving away from HBO, we're calling it Max. And now what has just happened a few weeks ago? Time Warner said, well, we've decided we're going to call it HBO Max. Something original. It's like when you're branding something, sometimes it's best not to forget yesterday. You've built up a brand. But anyway, HBO Max, whatever you call it today, has a new documentary series. And I kind of wonder, why did they do this? It's called Mortician, The Mortician. Why would you want to do a documentary on a mortician? Well, as I said, two of the three episodes of Upload, I'm going to watch the final one. We can talk about that maybe in the next podcast. What happened in this case is that you had an out-of-control mortician. Now, when you have someone that you want to have cremated after death, they wanted it done or the family wants it done, you go to a cremation place, they do the cremation, they give you the ashes. That's how it's supposed to work. Well, this fellow decided he was going to be entrepreneurial in a very odd way. Rather than just do them one at a time, he was going to throw in a whole bag of bodies. 15, 20 bodies at one time, cremate them all at one time, and then just divvy those ashes out to those 15 or 20 families.
Ooh, oh, oh,
Of course, you can
ouch.
make a whole lot more money doing that. But oh my, and there's more to it than that. There were some financial irregularities.
Imagine that.
That were on the side, not even directly related to that, but it was a funeral home in, I think, Pasadena, California, that had a long and storied, very nice reputation. And this young man who was in a family got involved and decided nobody could figure out how he was doing all this until, it came to light at a much later time and the police got involved and the regulators got involved. It's a crazy story. And again, we don't even have the full story yet. What happened is the man who was convicted criminally, he spent several years in prison. I think the reason they were able to do this is because he agreed to talk to them. So right after he got released from jail, I guess these documentary people who put this together picked him up at the prison and took him to this place and they interviewed him and he talked, gave his side of the story. And it's almost like, he would try to justify this and you would think, how do you justify doing something like
Yeah.
that? I just don't know.
Yeah.
So it's worth a watch. It doesn't sound like something that might be interesting, but it caught my attention. And I'm in the middle of reading a book, and it's been out there for several years. It was written by an academic by the name of Timothy Snyder, who studies autocracies. And the name of the book is On Tyranny, and it's back on the bestseller list because of what's going on today. People have more interest in this subject. And I'm in the part of the book now, not quite halfway through it, where he's talking about Vladimir Putin and about the people he studied in Russian history. Now, this one person had this view of an authoritarian rule in Russia, not necessarily a fan of the communist Soviets necessarily, but felt that Russia should be some kind of an autocracy and how the Russian government we see today is an outgrowth of that. So those are a couple of things I've seen. Anything you want to talk about you've seen or read lately?
Yeah. Last Saturday night, they ran the play on CNN for, it was a movie in 2005, Good Night and Good Luck, based on Edward R. Murrow and Fred Friendly, who was a producer in the news department and became the head of CBS News. Some of the things that they were going through during the McCarthy era. And it was very unpopular to stand up to the quote Red Scare unquote, and they were basically sticking their necks out to do honest journalism, and that is just to me so important. And the play was absolutely fantastic. My awesome and beautiful wife Kim and I watched it. She really wanted to watch it. I had seen the film, so I had something to compare it to. I've never seen a Broadway play before. I was blown away by the performances and how they did the sets and things of that nature. It was absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend that to anyone who likes theater. But the message to me, where you had the William Paleys, who controlled CBS and was wanting to make sure the news got, the Washington Post, when Katie Graham was the owner, when the New York Times had sole ownership. And they backed their reporters to go ahead and do these types of investigative reports and standing up and reporting the facts and doing what was needed and what was right. And I think that we still need to have that today, and we are losing it. There are definite pockets of it, but it's not as mainstream as it was because we're so diversified and everybody's locked into their own particular silos of viewing. But it was just a great example. This play was just a great example of how it should be done.
Yeah, the original movie that I saw was terrific, and you ought to go see a Broadway play sometime, Duncan. My wife and I, right before COVID, it was 2019, we went to see the remake of To Kill a Mockingbird with Jeff Daniels, which was terrific, and we saw Network. And on the last times that was played. With Bryan Cranston in that it was a remake of the movie Network. So if you've never seen a Broadway play, you need to go to New York and take your beautiful wife with you and have a time in New York City. It's a great place.
She was just mentioning New York City this morning, so thanks for pitching underhand for her.
Yeah, okay. I know she listens and watches, so we'll hopefully get to, because my wife and I love New York City, and if you want some tips, we can give you some tips on where to go, have dinner, and that kind of thing. One thing we're going to do to end our podcast each week is to do a top 5 list. And Duncan and I are going to kind of rotate this. I'm doing it this week. And I just found out the other day that Spaceballs, which was a takeoff that Mel Brooks did on the science fiction film. Mel Brooks did Blazing Saddles, which it was a takeoff on the Westerns. He did Young Frankenstein, a takeoff on the Frankenstein films. Well, he did Spaceball in 1987, takeoff on the science fiction craze at that time. Well, now they're going to put together a sequel to the Spaceball movie. So here's my top 5 list on why you may want it once it's produced. It's not even been shot yet. But once it's been produced, why you should go see the new Spaceball sequel when it comes out. Number 1, just to see Mel Brooks playing the part of Yogurt that he played in the original film at the age of 98. That's right, Mel Brooks is 98. Number 4, see Bill Pullman, who was in the original, be in this movie with his son Louis. That should be something to see. And number 3, we'll have to see if Disney World creates a Rise of the Sequels ride. Okay. And number 2, we'll have to find out what is left to make fun of in the whole science fiction realm. And the number 1 reason you should go see Spaceballs when it comes out is find out what the heck is a Spaceball. So
And the funny thing was, in the original Spaceballs, one of the quotes that I love is Mel Brooks's Yogurt, as you said, was saying, "Will I see you again? Well, hopefully you will in Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money."
Well, you remember he also did a film called History of the World.
Oh, love that. History of the World Part 1.
Well, that's the thing. At the end of it, he said he makes a joke about History of the World Part 2, and everybody thought it was coming, and it was just a joke. He had no intention of doing a History of the World Part 2.
That's called It's Good to Be the King.
And Mel Brooks, we're lucky to still have him around. He's one of the great movie makers and in comedies. People say, could Blazing Saddles even be released today?
No.
I wonder.
No. Showed that to my wife Kim a couple of years ago, actually about a year ago, and she was just mortified. And I said, you have to remember, this was, co-written by Richard Pryor, and they wanted to make it as far out, and they were making fun of every stereotype that they could, and that was what that's what they were doing in that, so you can't really take offense to it. But yeah.
We have one ask for you as the audience. Like and subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate it. Duncan and Larry will be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, this is Unscripted.